Home Secretary Yvette Cooper there, ending with a message of saying, let change begin. And earlier in her speech, she had reflected on the fact that she was able to address conference as a member of a government for the first time in 15 years, saying this Labour government will, and that she enjoyed saying that. She touched on knife crime, on immigration, on what she described as racism, thuggery and crime that had been witnessed over the course of the summer, saying very clearly she did not think it was protest, and also touching there towards the end on violence against women and girls. Let's bring in our Mhari Aurora, who of course is there in Liverpool at conference and been watching that closely. Mhari, what was your key takeaway?
Yeah, Wilfred, I mean, it was an interesting speech. To be honest, my key takeaway, this is not going to necessarily be what the government want to hear, but I was quite fascinated about how much she spoke about the Conservatives. One thing I've noticed from this conference is a lot of the speeches we've seen from cabinet ministers is a lot of talk about the Tories, and it also feels like they haven't quite figured out that they're not in opposition anymore. And when you're in the government, actually, many people would argue the best thing to do is to ignore the opposition and not talk about them and not bring attention to them. And there's quite a hefty section on the Conservatives. That's partly because they are still trying to kind of, wring out every last drop of the kind of blame game that has been the strategy so far. But I think at some point now, they have been in power for, almost 3 months. They are going to have to let go of talking about the Conservatives and really start focusing on exactly their vision and what they're doing. So that was, to be honest, just my key takeaway, purely on a strategy point of view. But in terms of the content of her speech, she referred to violence against women and girls, as you explained, Wilfred, and she said that the Labour government was going to treat it as a national emergency. She said that's what it deserved. And actually, she referenced Southport. She referenced those 3 young girls who were stabbed to death in Southport. Talked about the violence that ensued afterward and the fact that it was, she said it was a total disgrace. And she talked about the violence that spread across the country, not just in Southport, but there as well, as arson, racism and thuggery. And she got a very large applause for that and a bit of a standing ovation as well. Now, she did, as we were talking about earlier, she did mention migration. She did try and talk about that. That was a lot of when she started talking about the Conservatives. So trying to kind of shift the blame rather than focusing necessarily too much on any specific targets around that. But in terms of the key policies that she's announced, as it were, one was this kind of teenage sure start in terms of making sure that having preventative methods when it comes to knife crime being a bit more of a priority. We know that there's always been a lot of controversy and criticism for the Conservative Party about getting rid of youth centres and defunding youth centres, as it were. Also, she talked about, as we were talking about, Ronan's Law, banning ninja knives. That was the type of sword that was used to kill young Ronan, who, as you saw, his mother was there introducing Yvette Cooper, who she said she saluted her and her courage and thanked her for being there. And also, she talked about how she wants to crack down on dangerous weapons being sold online. So a kind of plethora right at the beginning of kind of policy announcements, as it were, making sure that they spoke about the amount of street crime and the kind of the way it surged, essentially, and the fact that they want people to feel that they can reclaim the streets. And, reclaim the streets is a kind of slogan we associate with women and girls, violence against women and girls, sexual assault. But also, she was using it as a kind of a way of a kind of catch-all to say, actually, we need to reclaim our streets, not just from, sexual predators, for instance, and making women feel safe, but also when it comes to violence and disorder on the streets that we saw after those stabbings in Southport, as well as, snatch and grab criminals, as well as people assaulting shop workers as well. So it was an interesting speech from that, but personally, my key takeaway is really the strategy for the Labour Party that is still talking a lot about the Conservatives, which I find bizarre.
Mhari, in terms of what we've got to come later in the day and the tone that we're expecting from the Prime Minister, what is your latest expectation? Have there been rumours? Has the mood changed as we've gone through conference and the sort of baggage of the stories around his Chief of Staff and freebies last week has gone away? Or is there still a bit of that sentiment that he's going to want to try and shake off?
I think he's still got to shake it off. I mean, I spoke to several Labour MPs last night, and they're still feeling quite bogged down is the word I would use with this all. They are, they're tired of the fact that this is still going on. They're tired of the fact that they're still being talked about it, being asked about it on the broadcast rounds. And I think they feel that there needs to be potentially a slightly tighter grip from Number 10 on the story, and I think they feel that it's almost run away with them in a way that it shouldn't have really been allowed to do so. So I think some are still going to have to shake off a little bit of that. I think there is still a kind of the residue of that story that has not completely been eradicated yet. But I think he will try and strike that balance, as Rachel Reeves did, around trying to be slightly more optimistic, a little bit more upbeat. We just won an election, but nonetheless, I mean, the trailing that we've seen overnight from what we're expecting from his speech is still quite doom and gloom in a lot of ways. He's talking about kind of a shared sacrifice almost, and essentially short-term pain and long-term gain, which all sounds fine, but when you've got short-term pain, when people have already had a lot of short-term pain already, people are going to ask, well, this starts to feel a little bit like long-term pain when it's been going on for several years. So that's just something to note there. But I think the anticipation will be, will there be this rabbit out of the hat? Will there be this kind of exciting surprise, something that really kind of catches people's eyes, something that really kind of catches the minds of Labour supporters, the party faithful that he'll be addressing later today, to try and almost move the narrative away from that story and stop that dominating and actually get people talking about something else. So the question is, will he go for that, or will he play it really, really safe?